I have a Mercedes-shaped dilemma. My CL500 only owes me £1,700, and surprisingly, this has turned out to be the best car that I have ever owned. Why is this a problem? Because despite its considerable talents, this car bores me senseless. I've had several offers from viewers who want to buy this off me for £3,000. But its refinement, comfort and all-round ability seem impossible to match at that price point. What could I find which is more interesting, but also at least gets close to being as good as this car? Enter the Mulsanne S. Now, I've been keeping an eye on Rolls-Royces of this era in case a cheap one came up that I could buy to use as a daily. Now, this one, with its sportier setup and looks, could be the perfect replacement. Now, you're not going to find a good one of these for £3,000. They hover more in the 5 to 10,000 range. But if I like it, spending the extra cash may be worthwhile. When the Silver Spirit first came out, most people expected the Bentley to be little more than a badge change. But in actual fact, the Mulsanne, and in particular the Turbo, sparked off a Bentley renaissance, and spin-off models like the Azure and the Continental led this to finally being a distinct mark in its own right again. This one is a Mulsanne S. Essentially, it coupled the standard engine, but with the running gear, so the sportier chassis, the alloy wheels, and the sportier interior from the Turbo R. So that means about 230 horsepower and 400 foot-pounds of torque. Let's see if it's good enough to tempt me out of the Merc. Now, the Silver Spirit, which this car is based on, was in itself just a development of the Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow from the 1970s. That's no bad thing because they were brilliant cars and a significant step forward for Rolls in those times. The main change really is in how they looked. There were some mechanical refinements as well, but at the time, the company didn't have very much money. So they just had to make it look a bit more modern, a bit with the times. That mainly involved changing the front end and the back. The side profile is very, very similar, but I think with their limited resources, they did do a good job making the cars look more modern. Whether you like these or not, it is quite interesting. I always thought the Shadows were pretty cars, and I didn't like these. But as time has gone on, the simpler, less fussy design to me has really come into its own. And this has been reflected by values. You used to be able to get these, a decent one even, for, you know, £3,000–4,000, 5,000 maybe. Now, the Shadows are around the £20,000 mark for a good car. And these, you're really looking between 5 and 10, 6 or 7, and more than that for the really good ones. This one, being essentially a turbo without the engine, for me is the perfect compromise. Now, it's not the kind of car that you're going to want to drive quickly in any case. So having the turbo, although it's a bragging right, and every now and again it might be nice to put your foot down and just think, wow, how quickly can a living room propel itself down the road? But I think it's a short-lived thing. This has all the benefits of the turbo, so it's a little bit handier in the way it handles. It's not quite as soft. Has 99% of the refinement and the comfort, but without the extra costs of running those cars. Now, it's incredible to think that at one point, BMW's V16 development engine of the late 80s, I think it was called the Goldfish, was tested in this. It was also used in a BMW 7 Series Mule, but they struggled for room in that car. In the amazingly huge engine bay that you had here, it was a perfect fit. In the end, BMW decided not to produce that. I think the idea was that it would have replaced the engine in the turbo. But can you imagine what a car that would have been? One of these with a V16 engine. main thing I think that comes across is this interior. Now these are just beautiful things. Some of the switches, the rocker switches there for the lights, for example, to the heating controls, to these lovely sort of ball vents, the little joysticks for the mirrors as well, metal joysticks. Where have you seen that in any other car? The leather is incredible. Now this, being essentially a turbo in drag, has what they call the sports seats. They wouldn't feel like sports seats in any other car, but thinking about it, having been in other rollers, you do get a little bit more, it does hold you in at the sides a bit more. There's a bit more profiling to these than the standard seats. The incredible wood veneer is there and present, all the instrumentation, maybe a couple of the little bits that stand out and don't fit in with the rest of the interior are these vents here, which look a little bit cheap, but also some of the controls for the seats and the memory buttons as well don't look the best. But everything else, it makes you feel special, this car. Look at the way that the doors, you know, these door cards, they are so solid. The wood feels so thick. It's a car that makes you feel special in a way that my Merc just can't aim to achieve. Now the interior on that is pretty nice, but it doesn't feel special. More importantly though, how does it drive? Because, I mean, it's a bit of a silly comparison. We're only doing it because I'm looking for cars to replace that Merc. The Merc is about 13 years or 14 years younger than this is, and as a design, it's even further apart. But it's a testament as to how far ahead Rolls were with the original Shadow, how incredibly well this drives. And although it is by no means a sports car, the sportier suspension, I believe it's very slightly lower, a little bit stiffer, means that it doesn't have the wavy motion that the Silver Spirit does. It's a tiny bit more controlled. It's not sporting. It's actually more comfortable in my view because it doesn't float around as much, and you can drive it without having to be too careful about taking bends too sharply. Let's see how it feels in non-turbo form. Foot to the floor. Changes up at 4,000. There's just nothing sporty about this. It doesn't matter, it has the same suspension as the Turbo R. It manages it a little bit better. It doesn't quite fall into the corner as much. The engine is perfectly suited to everyday driving. It's only when you do something like what I've just done there and then, which is put your foot right to the floor, that it feels like it could do with a little bit more power. As it goes higher up through the rev range, as well as it heads up towards 4,000, which is where it changes, it starts to roughen up a little bit as well. But driven as you should, which is with a little bit of spirit, but in no way pushing it and being quite smooth, it hovers around 1,500 revs, well, 1,700 revs. Pickup is immediate. So a little flex of your foot, that throttle travel, there isn't that much to it, and it responds instantly. Even now, this feels like a fantastic luxury car. Maybe one of the areas where it falls down a little bit, you can hear the odd squeak and creak, mainly from the leather. But it doesn't feel like this is a stiff platform car. It doesn't feel that solid, so it's a good job the suspension is so soft. I'm sure it wouldn't be able to keep up with the Merc on this same road, but I have to be honest, I think I'd probably have more fun getting to the limitations of this one than I would going a lot quicker in the Merc. This one belongs to Rafe, who also brought me the red W124 that I did a few months ago. I think he struck out lucky again. He got this at auction on Classic Car Online, and the colour, the interior spec, the condition of it, I think is fantastic. And it drives really well. I haven't felt anything out of place at all. There's no clunks, there's nothing moving, it feels tight. The mileage is quite high, I suppose, 114,000, but it really doesn't feel it. The interior doesn't feel or look worn, and it drives incredibly well. He said he's got a very thick history file, and I can well believe it. He is, by the way, a professional photographer, and he took the picture that I'm using in the thumbnail. So I'll put his website address in a pinned comment. Do go and have a look at what he does. The steering is fingertip light, and incredibly, you get a little bit of feel. Certainly, I think you get more feel in this than you do in my Merc, which is saying something. One of the biggest faults of that car for me is just that it is boring to drive. It's so good at what it does, but it cannot do emotion in the same, well, it can't do emotion at all, really. And this majors on it. They're almost complete opposites. In terms of refinement, I'd say that this is practically as quiet. On this road, I can't really do high speed, so I can't comment on how quiet they would be on a motorway, where the Merc certainly is really, really refined. One of the things that would worry me if I was to replace the CL with this is the running costs. Now, if you get a good one, they don't have to be that bad, but I think simply even in terms of fuel consumption alone, my Merc does about 25 to the gallon on average, which is incredible for a 5-litre V8 in that class of car. The official fuel consumption on these is about 15, and Rafe was telling me, I think optimistically, when he drove it up here, that he thinks maybe on the way up here it did about 20 miles to the gallon. I don't reckon it's going to be very easy to achieve that with these cars, even on the motorway. They do like to use fuel. It's also not a subtle car, so part of what makes it so incredible to me, which is those ridiculous looks, also means that you cannot really pass unobserved. It's not the kind of car that you can leave somewhere. If you go to a rougher area or so on, I'd be a bit worried just because it's going to attract so much attention. And that's one of the things to keep in mind if you're going to try and use one as a daily. In terms of usability itself, though, it would be absolutely fine. It's an absolute cinch to drive. It's super comfortable. It's very refined. So to sum up, would I be able to use one of these to replace my CL? It's a difficult question. It doesn't have the everyday usability of the Merc just because the Merc is so much more anonymous, and although they can be expensive to run, on the whole it's going to be a lot cheaper to run than this. All in all, I think I'm going to carry on keeping an eye out. I think one of these, the Bentley versions with a stiffer suspension, would have to be the kind of thing I'd be looking for, but I would probably consider a Silver Spirit. If you have one, do send me an email, and you're thinking of selling, do send me an email, and maybe we can have a chat about it. Thanks also much to all of you for watching. Thank you to Rafe for bringing it down, and I can't wait to see what is going to replace that Merc.